So, hi everybody, welcome. I'm so glad that you're able to come for our conversation, and hopefully we entertained you with our silly small talk at the beginning. So I'm Dr. Getzoff. Everyone calls me Eli. Call me Eli. I'm a pediatric psychologist. I've been in Baltimore for about 16 years and at Mount Washington for about, well, that entire time. My specialty are kids with more medical trauma and chronic illness traumas. We're going to be kind of talking very broad about a variety of different traumas and things that would help regardless of what the youth might be experiencing that you come across or your kids in particular. So thank you, welcome. And I am a boy mom, two boys, so I can speak to, some of the actual experience of using this, some of these techniques with my own kids. This is my son Liam's picture of how he deals with anxiety and stress. So we thought it'd be fitting to throw on here. Jen, you want to go?
So I'm Dr. Tripp, but I go by Jen, so please call me Jen. I am actually a recent transplant to the Baltimore area and just joined Mount Washington back in Mount Washington Pediatric Hospital in November of 2020. So really excited to be a part of the team and a part of the community, and starting off by getting to interact with all of you all. So.
And please put any questions in the chat. We'll have opportunities for questions as well. I think you've seen, we're going to talk about a variety of different ways to improve resiliency in kids and how parents can kind of harness their own power, which is, I think, so important because so often parents don't feel empowered and don't really know what to do when their child's had an adverse event.
And the truth of it is, you guys, you know your kids better than anybody. And so that gives you so much more to help them. So we have strategies that you can implement with your knowledge to really help. So, So the first thing we want to talk about is just stress in general. And I think a lot of times when we think about stress, we think about negative things. But we actually really think about it in two different ways. There's good stress or good stressors, and there's bad stressors. So if you kind of think about how life is, you like to have things kind of the same, and that's just a comfortable spot to be. And so a good way to think about stress is it's anything that takes you out of that comfort zone. So the good stress are things that are like happy, but they still take you out of that calm, neutral space that you're used to. So it can be things like getting married, or getting a puppy, or even something like getting a really good grade in school. Anything that's like something that's exciting and takes you out of that spot, that's still considered a stress. And then we have kind of what people typically think about our stress is these negative events that happen. So things like a traumatic event, illness, having a global pandemic that shuts down life as you know it, switching to remote learning. Those are all things that we can kind of think of as kind of these bad stressors or distress.
Awesome. And, similarly, there's different types of trauma. I talked about how I deal more with more medical sort of trauma, but there's, physical injury types of trauma, psychological, emotional trauma, medical pandemic. What's critical in understanding is it's the individual's experience of the event, not necessarily the event. And that is such an important piece to really hit on because it's so easy to dismiss an event or try thinking that like, oh, if I downplay it for my child, then it's not going to be a big deal. And then they'll know that it's not a big deal. But that might also be dismissive and lead to more difficulties if we don't acknowledge that they went through something that was difficult for them.
So the other thing to think about is that, we have kind of all these different types of reactions to stress, and everybody responds to stress differently. In general, though, stress, especially having these repeated stressors over time, have been linked with things like worse physical or mental health, sometimes even just like vague symptoms like just maybe your stomach's just not feeling good, those kinds of things. But then also just like chronic illnesses. Um, People who have more stress over time also start to have more and more difficulty controlling their emotions. You might see them more snappy and irritable. And then a lot of problems paying attention and just kind of recognizing what's going on around them, and focusing in school. We see that a lot. So all of those kinds of things we want to just be mindful of when we think about stress.
And so what does it look like? Well, it's really complex. When we've had adverse events or stress that could come out behaviorally, you might see a child acting out. You might see them avoiding. Maybe they're kind of locked in the room, don't come out very often. Sometimes it's aggressive. There are times when it can become more self-harm. And the kids that I often see have physical symptoms that may or may not be um, explainable in a medical sense. Additionally, you can have anxiety, depression, numbing. Cognitive responses might include kind of like how they see the world, how they see themselves. They might have more of a negative outlook or fatalistic victim sort of mentality that might seem new or different or an odd maturation for them. Dr. Tripp, do you have more, or Jen, do you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think that's good.
Okay.
And so we also want to talk, this is kind of the core part of this is the what next. How do we build this concept of resiliency? And when we think about resiliency, what we really think about is this ability to keep going when something negative happens. So kind of that persistence, perseverance, and in many ways even how to get stronger from these negative events that happen. And what's really important is that, yes, there are some aspects of resiliency that are kind of seen as more genetic and more set, but there are a lot of ways that we can also build resiliency. So these are some of the factors that can oftentimes seem like less able to change. So things like having a positive attitude, having a more optimistic outlook on life, and then just having this ability to control your emotions. But I also want to stress that these are also things that can be changed. So you really think about how you view a situation. You can take that negative mentality of, oh, these things always happen to me, or you can kind of reframe how you look at it and say, okay, bad things happen to everybody, and I'm going to get stronger from this. One of the big things I want to think about is this concept of failure. And I think we oftentimes, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in the next slide as well, is we have this negative viewpoint on failure. And I absolutely love this quote by Thomas Edison. And he said, "I haven't failed. I found 10,000 ways that don't work." And so when we see a failure as this feedback, it can really help us use that and grow from it, learn from the experience instead of seeing it as this negative event. So really kind of conceptualizing this idea that failure isn't failure. So thinking about it, I've had lots of failures in my life, and really thinking about it instead as I went through something that was really challenging, and I learned a lot about myself, and I learned ways of dealing with situations better from that experience. We all fail. It's a really horrible feeling. I get it. I know it. It's important to accept those emotions, accept that negative feeling, and also really think about, okay, what did I do well in that situation? What part of it did I handle in a way that I want to keep using as I move forward? And what are some things that maybe I didn't do as well that I can do differently moving forward?
We have some really good questions in the chat. Hopefully, we'll get through them as we talk, but if not, we will definitely circle back to them because they are really great questions. So how can you help? And this is really, I think, the what you guys have come for, right? So regardless of whatever the event is, if your child being able to be encouraged to work hard, but realize it's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to make mistakes. And it's difficult because we want our kids to be successful. We want them to do well. But we don't usually learn from successes. We learn more from our failures. And we learn, oh, this is how I need to tweak this or do that. And so it's going to be really important to encourage and even have an open dialogue with the child about how you've had to persevere and things that you have failed at and how you were able to get over it or around it through whatever mechanisms you were. Focusing on the positives can be really, really important because there can be this tend to be like, oh, I'm so dumb. I'm never going to get through it. I can't do this, rather than you just haven't figured it out yet. And let's do the yet piece and let's figure out the yet piece together. Nice.
Yeah, one of the things I talk to parents about a lot is the worst thing that you can be for your child is a perfect parent, because
Mhm.
they really look to you as a model, and you get to show them how to deal with these negative things that happen, and model for them what resiliency looks like and perseverance looks like. So
And you know, kind of getting Cecilia, her point of having a healthy definition of success is so critical to that, right? So success may not be straight A student, right? In what I talk to my kids and the kids that I work with is if you tried and you get a C, that's amazing, right? If you didn't try and you got an A, is that as wonderful? Is that teaching you anything? Or if you didn't do anything, you failed, well, then maybe that's because you didn't do anything, right? Maybe that doesn't make you dumb or unable to do it. You just didn't do it. You didn't try, if that makes sense. Um, so, you know, again, another really good question. Hopefully, we'll get to this, but if not, we're going to circle back to define success and resilience in terms that would be helpful to a child. I think that it's highly individualistic, depending on the age, developmental level, and in what area they want to be successful. But as we go through this, it might become a little clearer, but we'll come back to it certainly. So this is shaped by a lot of factors as far as how we treat ourselves, how our family treats us, how society treats us. So, having your child use positive adjectives to describe themselves, redirect negative comments. So, getting back to like, I'm so stupid, being like, I made a mistake and it's okay. Or using I feel statements like, I feel really frustrated. And let me tell you, I've had plenty of opportunity. I have two kids that, you know, are doing remote school right now. And those emails from the teachers every night about this wasn't turned in or whatever, you know, I have to use the I feel a little frustrated that I saw you on your video games for most of the day when clearly you did have work to do, but you told me you had already done it. Why am I getting an email saying that it wasn't done? Now, my knee jerk reaction might be like, dude, you like totally lied to me. And I want to go, rawr. But coming with more of an I feel of like, where's the disconnect? I'm not sure what happened, at least allows for a more open process for them to explain, oh, I wanted you to check it. I didn't want to submit it until you made sure that it was right. Oh, that actually is very insightful. Great. So I'm really glad I didn't come at you as hot as I felt, you know. So these are really useful techniques to use for yourself, but then also encourage your kid or your, you know, whoever you're, whatever youth you're working with to also use those skills.
sorry, this is
Is
me.
that me? Okay.
Sorry, I'm on it. So one of the things that's important to recognize is that we often in when something negative happens, we often feel really helpless and out of control about what's happening. We think about this global pandemic that we are all experiencing right now. How many of us are feeling helpless and like all of these changes are happening in our lives and there's nothing that we can do about it, and we kind of have this idea that there's nothing we can do. But the truth is that there are things that we can do. And so when we focus on the things that we can control, it really helps us kind of control and manage those helpless and out of control feelings. And sometimes it can be a really small thing, but even those small things can have a huge difference. So I've dealt with children that were like new onset paralysis where they really couldn't move. They were still maybe just getting a little bit of control with their hands, but there was so much that they suddenly couldn't do. And so then it was, well, let's give them a choice of what outfit to wear. Because even though it's a small thing, like, am I going to wear this outfit or that one? It was such a huge thing for them to just be able to make that choice. So no matter how out of control your life can feel, there are still things that you can do. You can still choose, what am I going to make for dinner tonight? Where in the house are we going to set up an extra desk for remote learning? Those kinds of things. So really focus on those, and instead of focusing on all the things that you can't control. Another thing that can be really helpful is have them help other people. And again, this really addresses that feeling of helplessness. If you're helping somebody else who's in need, then it gives you a sense that you are helpful and helps counteract that helpless feeling.
And have something to contribute, because sometimes kids, particularly depending on the circumstance, once they feel out of control, they maybe don't feel like they have something to contribute, or they have some sort of ownership or confidence. So even if they're helping their younger sibling doing something that they might think, oh my God, that anyone can do that. Well, not anyone can do it. And if you help a younger sibling, something very basic, something that you might have a lot of ability to do, can be very helpful. We've touched on this in a past couple slides, but recognizing and validating your child's feelings are real. And that is critical. And it kind of gets to maybe one of the comments about kind of like, how are you supposed to differentiate if it's what's going on? It doesn't really matter, right? So if they had an adverse event that might have been, really minor in your eyes or not that big of a deal, if they're really upset about it, then it is a big deal. Then it is something that needs to be discussed and validated and to talk through. And I can't emphasize enough being able to talk about your emotions as well as your child's emotions together and regularly, not just over big events, but every day, and that's where, for those of us that actually venture out of the house, car rides, captive audience, great time. But, right now, most of us are eating at home. So cooking, preparing meals, setting the table at the dinner table, and it may not even be the whole family. It might be whoever's available at that moment. But those are amazing opportunities to kind of be like, oh my God, I had such a day today. I was really frustrated and I want to scream. But you know what I did? I da, right? And whatever good coping skill that you feel like you were able to use and elicit from yourself, that you can be like, how was your day? What did you do? What do you do when you get really frustrated, right? And getting advice from them and making them feel like they might be able to help you really helps them feel like they've mastered a particular skill. Depending on the circumstance, sometimes they need to face there. So if we have some bullying issues or peer difficulties, I mean, right now school's remote, but it doesn't mean they can't go, they still have to go to school. They still have to sign into that class. So, helping them and provide support and kind of facing their fears as safely as possible can be, quite critical. And also having them know that you have their back and that you will support them in that process, however it needs to be for that circumstance. Um, I am very much into plans and lists and being very systematic about things. So as we go on, I'll show you a little bit more about that. But helping your child learn how to problem solve is really important. It really starts with identifying and asking them, what do you think we need to do? And that's something that when I work with kids and they're like, I keep, my grades are going down because I'm not turning in my work. Okay, what do you think we should do about that? I might have the answer, but I'd love to hear what they say, because sometimes they say the most amazing things that are better than what I would have said and are much more applicable to their world. So when they use those skills, they'll know that they came up with it. I can give them the like, oh my God, that's actually brilliant and so much better than I would have told you. And then it's that much more helpful because it's their idea and it's based on what they feel is going to work for them. Wait, are we on 6?
So,
We
yes,
skipped it. Oh, there we go. Okay.
technical difficulties, sorry.
So teaching coping skills very specifically and didactically, directly kind of saying, okay, you know what? In this circumstance, this is going to be really helpful. So, teaching kids that they can learn positive coping statements like, I can do this, I can handle my worry. Okay, I haven't ever failed. Why do I think I'm going to fail now? I'm worried, but oh, here's my evidence of why I don't need to panic. I've studied. I'm good at this subject. This is something that I enjoy. Oh, so maybe I don't need to stay up until 2 a.m. studying for that test, or maybe I don't need to, overdo because I have some of these skills and I'm stopping and I'm questioning my thoughts. What's really, really important, and I'm not sure if it's on another slide, so I'll come back to it. But just because you feel it doesn't make it true. And so for kids to realize that just because they feel upset, panicked, scared, threatened, doesn't mean that they are right now. Maybe in the past, maybe other things have been going on, but for them to evaluate and look at the evidence of like, oh, no, my caregiver's here, my family's here, I'm in, wherever they are, and to be able to ground themselves in the reality of their situation to get some of that control back. Sometimes relaxation techniques like deep breathing, visualization can be really, really useful, particularly if there's anxiety later at night, as there can be for a lot of youth, falling asleep, things like that, kind of being able to focus their thoughts in a way that they can use to help themselves out in whatever the situation is that they're kind of dealing with. So yeah, self-affirmation and self-boundaries, and boundaries is a great thing. We're going to get to that in the next few slides because I'm all about boundaries.
One of the things as well about these coping strategies is practicing them a lot when they're not in the situation. So practice these deep breathing, these visualizations when you're calm, because oftentimes when you're in the situation, you're all in the situation and you can't think about how to strategize it. Or if you know that whichever child that you're working with, if you know that they all often get anxious or stressed before they do a presentation, or if they're being bullied in school, you have a conversation with them before the situation of how are you going to handle this, maybe practice it with them beforehand, those kinds of things. And again, we talked about this a little bit before about how you all as the parent, as the adult in the room, you are the model for this child. And so when they see you staying calm in a situation, when they see how you manage your anxiety, it really teaches them those skills because they're watching you all the time, even when you don't want them to be. So making sure that you're using those and even you can even say it. So sometimes if I'm driving and I get angry and I've got a kid in the car with me, I'll say, oh man, I'm really angry right now. I'm going to take a couple of deep breaths and then I'm going to start singing along to this song because that helps me when I'm angry in the car.
Absolutely. Really kind of almost having like a running dialogue of kind of what your thought processes are helps them learn what their thought processes are. And then they'll be able to access like, oh, right, because my dad does that, or my uncle, or whoever.
Mhm.
Awesome. I'm going to do that too.
Yeah, and modeling these other things like the self-care, the activities that you do that make you feel better when you're stressed, and when you model positive thinking. So, when you make a mistake, say, "Oh, I made a mistake. I'm going to try again," as opposed to when you make a mistake saying, "Oh, I'm so stupid." They're going to model what they're going to model whatever you show them. So if you model how to respond to these situations, they're gonna follow your lead.
Hmm.
um Also just have structured activities and events for them. I know that it's incredibly difficult right now with COVID, and there are so many changes to our lives right now. Seeing if you can find peers in your bubble can make such a big difference.
Absolutely. And we're all about is structure. And Cecilia's point too, when we fail to model well, be good to reflect on some of our failures. It is amazingly helpful and insightful, and kids they latch onto it when you talk about like, wow, I really struggled with that. Like with my kids, thankfully they're more gifted in math than I am, but I look at some of their work, especially this new math, and I don't understand it at all. And I'm just like, do we need to get you a tutor? Because I think I'm tapped out. I might have a PhD, but you're in third grade math now, and I don't really know what to do. And kind of being able to, be vulnerable and show your weakness and specifically discuss some of the misbehaviors or challenges that you've had and why that might impact how you do things for better or for worse. Because then they get grounding of, again, not having to be perfect, how you can, make up or make amends or restructure from mistakes. And that's so important because we all make mistakes.
Yeah. Um, it's also okay to apologize for them. I mean,
Mm,
who hasn't been in a situation where you had a really long day and you get home and your child starts going, "Mom, mom, mom," and you're like, "What?" And you snap at them, or they do something that upsets you and you yell at them. It's okay to go back to that situation and say, "I am so sorry that I snapped at you. This is a way I'm going to handle it moving forward," or something along
mhm.
those.
Critically important to admit when you've done things wrong and apologize, because then they'll be able to admit when they've done things wrong and apologize. And kids are
Hmm.
so forgiving. So then you'll feel better and you can relinquish some of that guilt that you might have for yourself of like, oh, because they'll be like, oh, it's okay. I get it.
And then structure, and we're going to talk about this quite a bit because it's
Mhm.
very important for children.
And this is sleep recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics and the National Sleep Foundation. I There's younger kids up there, so how many hours in a row at night somebody should be sleeping? And infants, toddlers, and preschoolers, that might include naps. So the total amount of time might be a little bit longer than you would think, but from 6 down to the bottom of the chart, that's without naps. And as much as possible, if your youth in your life are 6 and older, unless they're sick, really try to discourage the naps. Naps can have very detrimental effects in kind of restarting that sleep cycle, not making them tired at night, and sleeping in a row at night really lends itself to healthy growth, minimizing complications with health illnesses, clumsiness, as well as other sorts of mental health concerns, anxiety, depression. Everything happens and everything's worse when we're tired. And for those who might get, 3 or 4 hours of sleep at night and then take a 3 or 4 hour nap, they might think, oh, I'm getting 8 hours of sleep, but it's not in a row. And because it's broken up, they're less effective. They're less likely to do schoolwork because they're going to be napping. So the after school homework time becomes the middle of the night time, and we're just less efficient and skilled without proper sleep.
And really important to highlight, this is not just a when you're doing in-person learning 5 days a week thing. This is an important part of having a structured routine, is having those set bedtime and wake time every day. And they should be set pretty much no matter what, right? So
Weekends and holidays, summers, as
even the
unpopular as that might be.
so
Absolutely. So this is a schedule that I came up with for my older son who is 12. And right now with remote learning, he's blessed in that his school starts at 9 a.m. And so you can see that I have kind of school, lunch. What's really important is wake times and bedtimes. Meal times are also, within an hour or so. Sometimes they're a little later. Lunch is almost because it has to be when he's in a break from school. Although with remote learning, some kids are noshing and learning at the same time. But you'll see the exercise is on there. You'll see that time off of screens is on there. When they're going to bed is on there. So that you can see that like within that, there's a lot of empty squares because there's a lot of free time, a lot of ability for them to make their own decisions, but there are certain things that are kind of non-negotiables. So my kids are not sleepers. They've never been sleepers. So they almost never sleep past 7:30 if something miraculous has happened. So I know they're going to be up before school is going to start, but then I also make sure that the 12-year-old is going to bed and hopefully asleep by 10 p.m. So to do that, because of the blue light that we get from our screens, and kids are having so much screen time right now, it's really important to have that time between off the screens and bedtime to just kind of chill, maybe do some activities, play some instruments, whatever it is that you guys like to do as a family, um, to allow them to have that kind of decompression time, particularly if your youth are like mine, where they're gaming and screaming and pounding tables during their games, and that can be a really high energy, high stake activity of playing Among Us or whatever, that they really do need to decompress because they're just way too hyped before they're going to be able to relax and go to bed. I tried to pepper in some activities that I felt we could do within a pandemic, but you guys obviously have to use your best judgment. So yeah, if um, I love this question, Brenda, about grades and taking away electronics and limits, and I think there are many factors to continue or to consider when it comes to screens, particularly right now. I call it recreational screen time if it's not school based. So that's going to be you're playing your games or Discord or FaceTime or whatever it is that you're doing with your friends. And for some, it is helpful for them not to have access to screens. I have one, I have several kids, but a couple kids that I'm working with where they do not pay attention to their class if they also have a TV working in their room and their cell phone. So during school hours, they don't have access to them. And parents, I mean, right now with so many, modern TVs, you can just take the remote and essentially this TV is like not functional because like how else are you going to turn the channel? So, taking the remote, taking the plugs or taking the phone and removing that until there's a time where they should be done with work. And I'm a huge proponent of a quitting time. You may not be finished. I'm never finished with work, but I have a quitting time. And that varies from one, hour to the next in a day. But I'm almost always done by 8. For me to going to bed like around 10:30, because I get up at like 5, I need to have that time. So I can't work up until 10 o'clock. And I've noticed that when I do push those limits, even for myself, it takes me forever. My brain needs that time to decompress. So then what might have been my 2 hours at 8 p.m. because my 2 hours at 10 p.m. and then I don't get enough sleep and everybody suffers. So it's really, really important to have kids realize, oh, wow, we just discovered you haven't done any work this whole quarter. We have 3 more weeks. We have some stuff to do. We have a push. So we have a start time and we have an end time. I like using a workday model, like a 9 to 5 or 8:30 to 5 type of model for kids too, to say, okay, during these times, even on the weekends, because you have work to do, that's going to be work time. So there's not going to be phones, there's not going to be TV. A blanket statement of taking away screens may not always be recommended because, especially right now, that's their whole lifeline. And so, if they don't at least have some opportunity to touch base with peers, their overall mental health might really decline. And so, it kind of depends. There might be like you can have it, if quitting time for kids from school and some of the after school work might be 6 o'clock at night or something, then maybe they can have it for 2 hours pending that they've done well, they did their chores, no attitude, whatever those, limits or considerations might be. And so they get a smidgen, but maybe it's not blatantly taken where then because here's the thing, it's like it might also be punishment for yourself, right? If then you might have to entertain them depending on your age of your child, or they're going to be, constantly on your tail about like, what am I supposed to do? I don't have anything to do. And you might want them to have a couple hours, and a couple hours is more than enough.
You also might want to just kind of be mindful of what your expectations are right now. This is a really challenging time for
So good.
everybody.
Yep. Mhm.
And so just kind of be mindful of, is this a reasonable expectation, or what is the reasonable expectation in this situation? So if you expect your child to get straight A's on everything, and they really struggle with math, that might not be a reasonable expectation for that child. So shifting and thinking about how fair are you being.
Mhm.
I'm going to try to get through these next couple of slides pretty quickly because I want to make sure we have time for questions, and we only have about 9 minutes, and apparently we get cut off right at 12. So please make sure you put your questions in the chat so we can get to as many as we can. I want to kind of talk about, this ties in really well with what we were just talking about the importance of boundaries and rules. So I tell parents to be mindful of where you set that boundary, because once you set that boundary, you really want to keep it consistent. So I think about it like a bridge, and the rules that you set are the handrails on that bridge. And if you set those boundaries really low, it's actually really scary for that child to walk across the bridge. But eventually they'll get it and they'll be okay. If you set the boundaries really, really high, they'll feel real safe and they'll like run across that bridge. They might have a little trouble when they get to the other side of the bridge though. So kind of having those boundaries set, those rules set kind of in that middle level is a really good way for them to safely cross that bridge without having a whole, like tons and tons of structure. One of the most problematic things though is to set a rule and then change it, because that's like the handrail of the bridge moving as that child is walking, and they never know where the boundary is, and they never feel safe crossing that bridge. So where you set that rule, keep it there.
And think about that and know it. And there are times, many times, that I have to be like, I'm very upset. We really need to talk about this, but I need a moment, because I know if I
Right.
scream out an angry boundary or angry rule, it's not going to be something I'm going to be able to follow through on. And that's going to make it even more inconsistent and difficult for them to know what to do in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you walk in the room and they're coloring on the walls and you yell, "You're grounded for the next month," it, that may not be really reasonable for them drawing on the wall. So just taking that breath and making sure that you're in a spot. If you're co-parenting with somebody, maybe say, your co-parent and I are going to talk about this and decide the best way. You don't need to set that boundary immediately though. I want to be really, really mindful about this as well, because I get a lot of children and adolescents who have this idea that they are a bad kid. So we want to be really mindful of labeling the behavior that you're doing as bad rather than the child. So if that child is coloring on the wall, they are not a bad kid, they are doing a bad behavior. And so saying that behavior is not acceptable instead of labeling the child is really important. And this ties in with this kind of what we call restorative justice approach. And this is an idea that really helps shift the focus, and it really looks at the impact the behavior has on kind of the victim, if you will, of the behavior, and talking about how that impacted them. And instead of punishing or shaming the child for their behavior, instead focus on how to repair the damage that has been done. That's kind of the restorative part of it. So really what that looks like is, are you doing this slide or no, this is me, okay.
Yeah.
So really address the behavior. Don't just ignore the child's kind of negative behavior, but address it, and then say, hey, when you almost ran into the street, you really scared me. When you called me this name, you hurt my feelings. When you went into my bedroom and you took money out of my wallet or my purse, it made it so that when I got to work, I couldn't buy my lunch and I had to be hungry. And then create a plan for how they can make it right for you. So maybe if they stole money out of your purse, they have to do a certain amount of chores that earn them money to pay you back, right? Or if they, maybe in school, they called the teacher a bad name or they were disruptive in class, what they can do is they can help that teacher after school one day to clean up her classroom.
So this is being recorded. I don't know how we can get you guys the slides, but we will inquire and find out to make sure that if you guys want the sides, you can, as far as when is stress a problem, when is previous experiences needing to be addressed, continual coping and adjusting is needed during this time and ongoing throughout, a kid's growth and maturation. If behaviors, mood, whatever it is that is unwanted or problematic, if it's excessive, persistent, interferes with your child's activities of daily living, so school, friendships, your relationship with them, then that might be something that might be excessive, might need to be addressed. So, that might be a time where you go to like a Mount Washington Pediatric or a Kennedy or some of these places to kind of get that assistance and to get that help. So we have a ton of resources. So I don't think we have one on screen time. There are a number of resources online for the American Academy of Pediatrics had like a contract, a screen contract, and they have cell phone contracts and such for youth. Like you can have a cell phone, but your grades have to stay up, otherwise you lose, or you have to be off at a certain time. And so I absolutely recommend you going to American Academy of Pediatrics. They have like almost like worksheets about this. And it's, I think really difficult because kids, they might recognize when there's too much screen time or when there are difficulties, but they do really need an outside structure to kind of force the issue, like a caregiver, to kind of say, nope, this is really the time, because they might realize, oh, I'm cranky or I have a hard time the next day. But the amount of internal reinforcement, the chemicals that are secreted from these games that really keep you hooked and keep you invested are really difficult to change on your own. And you might know this from your own experiences of like, oh, I should go to bed. I'm going to watch another episode of Netflix or whatever it is. You can already know, like, oh, I know I'm going to have a tough time, but you're an adult. You can kind of compartmentalize and kind of compose yourself, even though you're having a bad day. Super difficult for kids to do that. We
We
have
only have a couple minutes left. Cecilia, you had a couple of questions about like how do you differentiate between a child having a strong personality and a trauma response, like acting out or aggression. And again, that's super variable and super tricky. I think
history can be helpful if you
yeah,
know they've had it, and if they had a strong personality and they had a traumatic event, well, you can also have ticks and fleas, right? Like it doesn't have to be an either or. It could be they might have a more challenging time because of their strong personality, in addition to, oh gosh, now we have another level because of whatever happened.
and then Daniel, you're exactly right. I think oftentimes we do disregard these positive, these good stresses because we only focus on the negative. That's one of the reasons we wanted to talk about it and address it, is that it still takes you out of your comfort zone. So it's still a stressor. And we often say, oh, I can't be stressed. I just got a promotion. That's a good thing.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, Family Time Junior, that's a great one. Great. Absolutely. Thank you for adding that. It is difficult. And right now, we might say like, oh, in general, 2 hours. Before the pandemic, the average was somewhere around 5 to 8 hours that kids would have per day. I don't think that that's lessened over the pandemic. I think it's definitely grown. And I'm saying that's not school related, not virtual school related, just like that recreational screen time that I was talking about. So I don't think there's a right answer.
before we get cut off, because I'm concerned it might happen any moment now, please feel free to write down our emails and email either one of us. We are happy to touch base with you guys via email.